Earth Day if you're watching this on Earth Day. If not, let's make Earth Day every day and happy Earth Day. Earth Day is one of my favorite days to teach because I love doing things that care for the environment. So, picking up garbage. I like planting plants with the kids in little reusable containers on Earth Day. So, I'm sad that we're not at school today to celebrate Earth Day because I do make it fun. We do painting on newspaper and all kinds of crafts using old materials, so reusing materials so that we didn't have to throw them away. So maybe today for Earth Day, since you're home, you can do your own Earth Day projects. I have a couple linked on the webpage. There's a scavenger hunt. There's a couple videos you can watch. Maybe, hopefully the weather will be nice and then you can do something outside. Now, one thing that I do like teaching the class is in spring, dandelions, while some people call them a weed, is really a bee's first food after they hibernate in the winter. So it's really important to have dandelions in your yard. So if you have them, try not to pick them, even though sometimes it's nice to maybe give one to someone special. Just try to leave them there because they are important for the bees. So the book I'm going to read to you today for Earth Day is called The Wump World. It's a book that I was first introduced to by Mrs. Duray, who teaches kindergarten, because we share a lot of the same ideas and views on things for the environment. We like to try and do what we can. So she let me borrow this book, and one day I found someone giving it away for free. So I took it, and I thought, oh, I will read it on Earth Day. So here we are. Enjoy the book. Here is The Wump World, written and illustrated by Bill Peet. It's a little bit long, so brace yourselves. The Wump World was a small world, very much smaller than our world. There were no great oceans, lofty mountains, giant forests, or broad sandy deserts. The Wump World was mostly grassy meadows and clumps of leafy green trees, with a few winding rivers and lakes. But it was perfect for the Wumps, who were the only creatures living there. The Wumps were simple grass eaters and spent most of their time grazing on the tall, tender grass that grew in the meadows. In warm weather, they cooled themselves in the crystal clear rivers and lakes. At night, they slept in the shelter of the bumbershoot trees and tried to keep the dew off their backs. Since the Wumps had no enemies, they wandered around just as they pleased, with nothing whatever to worry about. However, the Wumps would have worried if they had known that someone a million miles away was watching their little world. One morning, the Wumps were awakened by a far-off humming sound. It seemed to be coming from somewhere above, and as the humming grew into a heavy roar, the sleepy-eyed Wumps crept through the trees for a peek at the sky. Zooming straight for the earth came a great flock of pot-bellied monsters, with tails and fins, spitting fire and shooting out streaks of black smoke. And the monsters swooped down to land. Huge, heavy legs sprang from their bulging sides, and like giant gaping mouths, doors flew open, and then ramps shot to the ground. And down the ramps came a horde of tiny creatures swarming out onto the meadow. These were the pollutions from the planet Pollutus. They had left their worn-out old planet to start a new life in a new world. After such a long journey, the pollutions were overjoyed to find themselves on solid ground once more. They were all prattling with excitement as they followed their leader, the topmost pollution, and the world chief across the meadow. At top of the hill, the chief stopped for a long look at the surrounding countryside. Finally, he said, "Looks good. We'll take it. Plant the flag, Sergeant. Let's get things going." Their flag reminds me of smokestacks, if you can see that, like little chimneys putting smog into the world. One shrill trumpet blast brought giant machines thundering out of the yawning spaceships, rolling down runways and out onto the meadow. The timid Wumps had been watching warily from their shelter of the trees, and at the sight of the giant machines, they were horrified. "Wump, wump!" they cried, and in a wild-eyed panic they went humpity-clumping through the trees to go diving headlong into the nearest cave. Then down they tumbled head over heels through a twisting tunnel to end up huddled together in the dark caverns while the earth-shaking machines rumbled and roared high above. Once they got started, the monstrous machines moved at a furious pace, gobbling up trees and grinding them to bits. More giant machines flattened the ground, followed by great scoopers and scrapers and diggers and gigantic cranes. Soon the entire Wump World was overrun. Does this remind you of a book that we read, maybe for Dr. Seuss Day? Remember the Lorax? Kind of reminds me of the Lorax. The busy little pollutions kept their mighty machines going full blast day and night without let-up, in a frenzy to improve their wonderful new world. Suddenly, great cities sprang up, huge factory buildings with towering smokestacks, high-rise apartment buildings, and tall, tall office buildings. And above all of them loomed the 100-story skyscrapers. Does this look like anywhere you've been before? Kind of reminds me of New York City. Along with the buildings came a tangle of streets and freeways with on-ramps and off-ramps, overpasses and underpasses, jammed with trucks and buses and cars of all sizes rushing pell-mell in every direction. It was one great turmoil of noise and confusion, and there was still more to come. While the poor Wumps remained underground, wandering aimlessly through the caverns, feeding on the fuzzy green moss growing on the ledges and mushrooms clustered in the crannies, and sipping the sweet water from pools fed by underground springs. But they were very unhappy. For all they knew, they might have to spend the rest of their days down there. The Wumps didn't dare venture up to the surface, not even for a peek. They were much too frightened by the endless rumblings and roarings and loud screeches coming from above, and it was growing noisier by the day. How would you feel if you were stuck down there, eating mushrooms off ledges? I don't think I'd like that. There was more and more noise and more of everything, more buildings with more smokestacks puffing and more smoke, more freeways with more traffic shooting out and more clouds of exhaust, more trash and more trash piles and more waste gushing into the rivers and lakes. Ugh. Well, see, that kind of looks like their flag, see? Pretty soon, the cities were clouded by the factory smoke and the fumes from the freeways. The pollutions could barely breathe. Oh, they went sneezing and wheezing about in the streets, grouching and grumbling and blaming one another for the awful mess that they were in. Ugh. Do they look happy? Do they look healthy? Look, sneezing and smoking and angry faces. One day, an angry crowd gathered outside the World Tower building, demanding to see the world chief. When the chief appeared on his balcony, all the pollutions began shouting at once, "We can't breathe the air, we can't drink the water, and we can't stand the noise. We've had enough." Kerchoo! Sneezed the chief. "I know just how you feel, and something will be done at once, I promise." With no time to lose, the chief called for a meeting with his 3 outer spacemen. "Gentlemen," he said, "this world of ours has gone sour. We've got to get out of here quick. But first we must find a new world, a better one. That's your job, men, so get going." "Righto, chief," barked the men, and within 15 minutes they were at the spaceport aboard their spaceships. Then zroosh, 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 the men took off in 3 directions, and in seconds they were zooming about in outer space at 7,000 miles an hour. Days passed with no word from the outer spacemen. After waiting a week, the world chief flew into a rage. "Blast it all," he bellowed. "What's keeping those blithering bubble heads?" Then one Monday morning, out of the dark, smudgy sky swooshed one of the spaceships. As the ship touched down, the man hopped out shouting, "I've done it! I've done it! I've found a new world, a bigger and better world!" "Nice going, lad!" cried the world chief, and the crowd gathered at the spaceport gave their hero one great rousing cheer, woohoo, which ended in a fit of achoo sneezing. In no time, the great news was sent flashing around the world over radio and TV, warning all pollutions to be packed and ready to go within 24 hours. At dawn the next day, the entire population swarmed into the space center and crowded aboard the giant spaceships. After double checking to make sure all pollutions were accounted for, the world chief gave the signal for blast off. With a thunderous roar, the giant ships shot off the ground, kazoom, up and away through the smoke-blackened sky, and they were gone. And at long last, peace and quiet settled over the Wump World. The sudden silence came as a shock to the Wumps. They could hardly believe their ears. Still, they wanted to take no chances, so they remained in their caverns with their ears cocked for the slightest sound. After a long, long silence, they decided it was time to go, and led by the biggest Wump, they crept up the tunnel to the cave entrance to find it covered by a crust of cement. With one powerful push of his snout, the biggest Wump bumped his way through. Then one by one, the Wumps waddled out into the freeway and gaped wide-eyed in amazement. They had feared something awful was happening to their world, but this was much more than they could have imagined. They were staggered by the size of the huge buildings, with walls and walls of windows looming over every side, and the broad layers of hard, flat crust covering the earth, which felt strangely cold to their feet. There was no sign of any tree or tuft of grass. Even the sky was gone, and the Wumps wondered if there was anything left for them. At least they must find out. They wandered the freeways for miles, only to find more and more buildings with endless heaps of wreckage and rubble. For all they could see, their world was completely ruined. Footsore and weary, the Wumps were about to give up and head back for their cave when the biggest Wump let out a joyful Wump! Could it be? Just ahead of them was a grassy meadow with a clump of bumbershoot trees, all that was left of their lovely world. Wumping for joy, the Wumps went bounding off the freeway out onto the meadow. Pretty soon, the hungry Wumps were munching away at the tall, tender grass. Now there was new hope for the Wumps. In time, the murky skies would clear up, and the rains would wash the scum from the rivers and lakes. The tall buildings would come tumbling down, and the freeways would crumble away. And in time, the green growth would wind its way up through the rubble. But the Wump World would never be quite the same. That is the end. So that could be our world if we don't take care of it. So just like in the Dr. Seuss book, unless with the Lorax, unless somebody cares about the earth a whole awful lot, it's not going to change. It's not. So let's see if we can make some small changes so that we can live in a nice green world like the Wumps need to. We kind of need to also. So tell me what you did in Class Dojo for Earth Day. I'm curious to see what you guys thought of on your own.